On the evening of July 4th, 1928, a plane would depart from the Croydon Airport in South London, en route to Belgium. On board this flight would be 8 individuals, including the pilot. However, one that stood out among the rest was banker Alfred Loewenstein, who at the time was the 3rd richest person in the world. With a net worth of around £12 million, he was not only wealthy, but he was also quite famous for the time. Yet, for all of his money and fame, Loewenstein would never make it to his destination. No, the plane didn't crash, and no, there was no hijacking. Alfred Loewenstein simply vanished from the flight. The ongoing investigation into the matter would bring not only countless theories to the case, but also unearth some very dark secrets about the wealthy banker. Secrets that could be the answers for a mystery that has gone unsolved for nearly a century. This is the true, albeit bizarre story on the strange fate of Alfred Loewenstein. Today's video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is one of the most popular turn-based RPGs available, and it's easy to see why. With amazing visuals, hundreds of champions, and a huge community that logs in daily to upgrade their champions and collect their rewards. If this is your first time hearing about Raid, then use my link in the description below. It works for both mobile and PC. Once you do, you will be in for a truly awesome experience. From the countless champions to pick from that not only look amazing, but each have their own unique skills that can suit any type of player. The excitement doesn't stop there. Intense boss fights, clan battles, PvP, weekly and daily rewards, and factions are just a few to name from. One of my favorite factions in the game, however, are the Bannerlords. They are one of the few human factions in the game. They are actually based off knights from medieval Europe, with a background story that once saw them as noble and on the side of good, but now their motives make the other races in the game question their true intentions. Out of all of the Bannerlords, I myself have been having the most fun with Septimus, who both looks badass but is also remarkably useful. With the frequent updates this game offers, there is always something new for the growing community to get excited for and discover. Each new update has new quests, bosses, skills, and most importantly, champions to earn and unlock. One thing that I am very excited about is the new rotation of the Doom Tower, and all of the rewards that I can earn from that when I am not farming the main campaign to level up my team. So, if you want to get a huge head start in Raid, all you have to do is hit the link in the description or scan my QR code, and you'll get an epic hero, Conneru, who is amazing in the Doom Tower, I might add. 200,000 silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, and 1 ancient shard so you can summon an awesome champion as soon as you get in the game. Your treasures will be waiting for you here in the inbox. Act fast though, because these sweet rewards will only be available for the next 30 days. So click that link in the description below to start your epic journey with your epic champions. On July 4th, 1928, Alfred Loewenstein, alongside the pilot, Donald Drew, co-pilot, Robert Little, Loewenstein's chauffeur, Ray Foster, Loewenstein's valet, Fred Baxter, Loewenstein's secretary, Arthur Hodgson, and 2 stenographers who frequently traveled with Loewenstein, Eileen Clark and Paula Biddalon, boarded Loewenstein's brand new Fokker F-V11, ready to begin their flight to Loewenstein's home country. Shortly after 6 p.m., the flight took off the tarmac, and for the start of the trip, Loewenstein was said to be in good spirits and spent a good amount of time to himself reading a book. As the newly purchased aircraft made its way over the English Channel, Loewenstein excused himself and made his way to the bathroom, stopping briefly to chat with Arthur Hodgson. This would be the last known conversation anybody ever had with Arthur Loewenstein. After their chat, Loewenstein made his way to the rear of the plane, closing the door and presumably going to the bathroom. After about 10 minutes, Fred Baxter went to go check on his friend and employer, knocking on the bathroom door and calling out for him, but hearing nothing. Fear and panic began to grow in Fred's stomach. He turned the handle and opened the door to find it empty. Alfred Loewenstein had disappeared. Rushing back into the cabin, Fred alerted the others and attempted to tell pilot Donald Drew, yet was unsuccessful as he couldn't hear the cries for help over the sound of the engine. Having no other means of communicating with the pilot, Fred grabbed a piece of paper and put it in front of Donald's face with the words "Captain's Gone" written on it. As Donald attempted to make an emergency landing, the rest on board moved to the back to check and see where Loewenstein could be. The plane that they were on was not what many of you may be thinking. It was a very small aircraft that only had a cabin, bathroom, and cockpit. The door separating the cabin from the back of the plane was thin, and noise could in theory have easily been heard. The back of the plane only had the one bathroom to the right, and to the left was the door that acted as both the entrance and exit of the aircraft. There was nowhere else Loewenstein could have been, hiding or not. It became clear that something very bizarre was happening. As the plane finally landed at Fort Mardyck, a military fort in France, those on board frantically got out, as did the pilot, checking the plane over to see if there was any sign of Loewenstein. Yet, nothing could be found. When the military did arrive, they were not there to aid, but instead actually arrest the entire party, as they were in a restricted military area. Once all of the members had been arrested and began being questioned, everyone ended up telling the same story, for the most part. That they were on a plane with their employer and he suddenly vanished. Yet, there were some inconsistencies in each person's version of events. Weirdly, none of Loewenstein's company wanted to give up their employer's name. I could not find any reason for why they would do this, but my only assumption is that when their employer was in fact the third richest man in the world at the time, they could have feared for their safety. Money, or at least the idea of gaining money, can change people, so perhaps they were simply protecting themselves. Eventually, Arthur Hodgson told the authorities the identity of their boss. After a thorough search of the plane by authorities, Alfred Loewenstein was nowhere to be found, and the only conclusion that they could come up with was that he fell out of the plane. But how could this happen? And how could nobody have heard? Surely there had to be more to this. Yet, to French authorities, the case was closed as an accidental fall, and that was where their investigation ended. The interest in the case was the same as Loewenstein himself, nowhere to be found. Be it that the police may have had little interest in the case, the media, on the other hand, had a field day with it. The number of theories that made their way to the front pages of newspapers throughout Europe were seemingly endless, from those saying that they spotted the wealthy mystery man in London days after, and it didn't stop there. There were reported sightings in Belgium, Paris, Amsterdam, and Hamburg. Yet, all these had been were simply stories from word of mouth and no concrete proof. There was another rumor that there had been a mysterious passenger that had snuck on and off the plane and was responsible for the fate of Loewenstein. Another rumor was that Loewenstein himself withdrew £500,000 the day of the flight and willingly jumped from the plane to start a new life. Why he would do this over the English Channel? Well, that is anyone's guess. As the rumors continued to grow around this case, so did the days with no answers. Nearly 2 weeks since Loewenstein's presumed demise, no progress had been made, no body had been located, and no leads were being formed. The entire ordeal was seeming to be destined to stay in limbo forever. That was until July 19, 1928, 15 days since the flight, when finally the body of millionaire Alfred Loewenstein was discovered in Boulogne by fishermen. His identity was confirmed by a wristwatch that was on his person. An autopsy as well was carried out at the request of his family. What was discovered was that Loewenstein suffered a cracked skull and several broken bones. It was concluded that he died when impacting the water, and with falling from over 4,000 feet up, that would be like hitting cement. So death was certain. The big question that stayed on people's minds now was how. Clearly he had fallen from the airplane, but how did nobody hear any commotion? Did he mistake the exit door for the bathroom? Was there a secret person there who threw Loewenstein out? How was it that nobody even heard the door slam back closed once opened? How would someone even open the door in the first place? The questions were numerous in nature, and those answers would be as vague as to what actually happened to Alfred Loewenstein. The possibly biggest question in the story of Alfred Loewenstein was how exactly he managed to fall, or well, be thrown out of a plane, and make zero noise in doing so. All theories that surrounded how he found himself falling into the English Channel rested on this. Regardless of how it happened, people wanted to know why nobody on board heard anything. The plane in question, a Fokker FV-11, was a very small aircraft, built with a single engine and able to carry around 12 people. It wasn't exactly what one would see now as anything spectacular. The plane, however, was very loud. That was seen back when those in the cabin attempted to get the pilot's attention. They were practically screaming at him, yet he could not hear them. And that in and of itself was actually a theory on the matter, but I will come back to that part later on in this story. One of the first, seemingly credible explanations as to why nobody heard anything from Loewenstein was that he could have possibly been drugged, which either killed him or made him unconscious. This could explain why no struggle or screams could be heard. Remember, there was only a thin door that separated the cabin from the back of the plane after all. But that again had police scratching their heads, because even if that were the case, then how would it be that nobody heard the door open? How would nobody have heard the door slam shut from the force of the wind? Any possible answer that they threw at this matter was met with something that made it seemingly impossible. After the autopsy results came back, it was shown that no toxins were found in Loewenstein's system. That was, however, not before the media got wind of it and ran a story saying that he was drugged and thrown out of the plane. Even though it was clear the next day, the media made all attempts at solving the case much more difficult. This was actually one of the first cases of media attention getting so big on a story that the interference made the investigation that much harder. A trait that society would go on to see time and time again in the following decades. The wife of Alfred came into the picture with her own idea of what happened shortly after his body was discovered. She went on to state that she believed he threw himself off the plane as his marriage to her was in shambles, and more personal details about their marriage was brought into light, such as them sleeping in different rooms, all romance being dead, and that most of the time she wasn't even in the same country as her late husband. She also attributed that his growing stresses were due to his alleged relations with organized crime. Yet many family members of Loewenstein denied this very strongly and claimed that he would never have harmed himself in that manner. It actually started a very long and drawn-out court case on his estate between his family and his wife, Madeline. Any thought that Madeline had that Albert did take his own life was quickly diminished when on September 10th of 1928, the autopsy was officially released and given for publication. An article in the New York Times was published the following day. A lot of attention that followed the death of Loewenstein was the door on the plane itself. As I have mentioned before, there have been a lot of focus on how he was able to open the door regardless, let alone how nobody could have heard it. The manufacturer of the plane eventually started their own investigation. They sent 2 mechanics, both of whom had worked on the same models, to test if the door could even be opened. The plane took off, and when it reached an altitude of 4,000 feet, both men attempted to open it. As a company official watched them, he observed that the men were using their combined strength on the door, and after a massive struggle, they finally were able to get it open just enough for one person, in theory, to squeeze through. For record, neither of the mechanics actually threw themselves out of the plane. However, when only one of the men tried opening it, using all of his strength, he could not get it to budge. The company official deemed that it was virtually impossible to open that door. They tested other variations to see if the door could be opened at all by one person, and the only noticeable thing of interest was that when one of the men braced his foot against a barricade and then used his body weight and shoulder to push as hard as he could against the door, that it opened no more than 3 inches before slamming shut from the force of the wind. It was also noted that it just being open that very small amount made a very loud slam when the door was closed. So, opening the exit door was impossible to do solo, which brought many to question the statements that all on board were saying, that Loewenstein was by himself in the back. Many following the case, and police, now started to wonder if one of Loewenstein's trusted colleagues was lying. They say that power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. A statement that I feel is very accurate for the story of Alfred Loewenstein. To many people, he was a good man. He treated his employees fairly, and his family only had positive things to say about him. Yet, just because someone shines a light on you doesn't mean that you don't have a dark shadow following you around. And many people attribute this dark shadow to be the ultimate downfall of Loewenstein and highly responsible for his demise. This dark shadow that I am referring to is notorious gangster Arnold Rothstein. In an effort to not get completely off focus of the topic at hand, a quick background about Arnold Rothstein is that he essentially was responsible for making organized crime, well, organized. He was the mentor of notorious figures in crime such as Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and Frank Costello. Known as the Brain, he was a businessman first and gangster second. He helped establish a network of illegal operations across the United States and then expanded his reach to Europe. Doing so made him not only infamous, but powerful enough that he was essentially untouchable. He shook hands with some of the world's elite, and in doing so, cemented his protection from any type of authority. How he related to Loewenstein, though, was from a meeting the two had shortly before Loewenstein's death. This meeting was said to relate to Loewenstein assisting Rothstein in expanding his empire across the Atlantic. This would, of course, increase both men's wealth and exceeding power. Rothstein obviously knew Loewenstein was one of the richest men in the world at the time, and for him to be able to strike a deal with a person that wealthy shows you the true power that Rothstein possessed. The entire reason that I am even mentioning this is that many see this as the loaded gun that caused Loewenstein's demise. Rothstein was known for double-crossing his associates. He was extremely unpredictable and always seemed to know if trouble was coming before anyone else did. It could be that Rothstein knew Loewenstein was having issues with his empire, and some stated that it was actually on the brink of collapse. Perhaps Rothstein worried that if that did occur, it would make Loewenstein desperate and cause him to do irrational things. making Loewenstein, in turn, a liability. And with how most gangsters operated, liabilities tended to always meet with the same fate, regardless of who they were. The full theory that followed was that Arnold Rothstein hired two professionals to board the plane, take out Loewenstein, and escape. If they did this by parachuting out once Loewenstein was out of the plane, or by escaping unseen once landing, is anyone's guess. It could play into how the door managed to be open, and it would also possibly lead to why nobody heard anything. If the two men were quick enough and surprised Loewenstein, then perhaps they could have kept him silent. However, no concrete proof could link Rothstein to being responsible for Loewenstein's death. The entire meeting between the two in the first place is also subject to intense speculation. But I feel that the glaring holes in this story are too obvious to overlook. It truly seems that if it did play out how I previously mentioned, then it would purely be on chance. How would these two potential assailants know Loewenstein would even go to the bathroom alone? How would they know that nobody would hear them? It just seems that there could have been numerous other methods and locations on where to orchestrate their attack. True, it could be seen as an accident, but once the investigation really started, it was deemed not to be one by many involved. Rothstein would no doubt have seen this as a possibility, and for a man who was said to never take chances, it just seems far too risky to carry out. The Rothstein theory, I feel, sticks more to the media expanding the story and having little credibility. It is no doubt one of the more popular ones, but it seems to only be the case since the drama and flair of it all seem to be more in line with selling newspapers than reaching any conclusion. There is a major theory on this story, however, that I myself have a hard time seeing past, as the explanation of it seems to check all of the boxes, and truly makes the most logical sense. I do not believe a gangster was responsible for anything that happened to Loewenstein. Instead, I think who is truly responsible were those who were closest to him that evening. When Alfred Loewenstein boarded his plane that would ultimately be where this entire mystery started, he surely had no idea that the trip would be his last. Out of all of the theories and backstory that I have covered in this video, all have seemingly fallen short that Loewenstein threw himself out of the plane or was the target of a notorious gangster. The facts of this case, that the exit doors would be impossible to open by one man, that nobody heard any commotion, and that the only thing that separated Alfred Loewenstein from the rest of those on board was a thin wooden door, are unable to be ignored. How is it that 7 people mere feet away could not have known something was going on? Some have said the reason for the passengers not hearing anything was due to the sound of the engine being so loud, that even the pilot didn't know the passengers were screaming at him. Yet, the pilot's story makes sense, that he was in fact closest to the engine. The cabin was not. Also keep in mind that Loewenstein was reading a book and relaxing before going to the back of the plane. I can't imagine he would do either if the sound of the engine was so loud that he couldn't hear if someone was screaming at him. None of the reported theories make any sense here, and I think that it is because the passengers on board, all of Loewenstein's employees, were behind this. My reason for even considering this is one of the facts that I just previously stated, that it would be impossible to open the door by yourself, that nobody would hear anything, and that nobody would see anything. And also, after doing more digging, I found out more regarding the strained marriage between Alfred and his wife Madeline. That Madeline would stand to inherit most of Alfred's estate. Now true, there were eventual court cases between Madeline and the family, But at the time, Madeline and their son, Robert Bobby Loewenstein, would be the main beneficiaries. Add in the fact that Madeline didn't even attend Alfred's funeral, and it does cast a very strong amount of suspicion on Madeline. Something her son didn't even understand. He knew their marriage was essentially just there for show, but he assumed that she would at least have the respect to show up for her husband's funeral. This has added to a theory that claims Madeline was behind the fate of Alfred. From what I read, it is believed that Madeline, pilot Donald Drew, and Loewenstein's valet, Fred Baxter, were the ones who orchestrated the entire event. And it would make sense. Both Fred and Donald would be able to open the door and throw Alfred out of the plane. If Donald left the cockpit and gave the controls to someone else, particularly the co-pilot Robert, he could have flown the plane while the attack was happening. The rest on board could have easily just been bribed or flat out threatened into silence, which would also account for several conflicting stories when they were being interrogated. The state that both Eileen Clark and Paula Biddleon were in, with frantically crying and appearing scared, could also lead credence to them being pressured into sticking to their stories. But why would I point out Donald and Fred as the two responsible? Well, looking into the life of both of them after the event is interesting. Donald went on to live an extremely lavish life, often being noticed due to him living well beyond his means and salary of a pilot. There were rumors of an affair between Donald and Madeline, but nothing could ever be proven there, and was heavily focused on by the media. Donald was also hesitant to talk about the events from Alfred's demise, quickly after his first interrogation. Fred, on the other hand, has an even more shady story. Fred went on to have a troubled life, with sources saying that he had become an alcoholic and would refuse to ever talk about Loewenstein after his death. And not just in the weeks or months following it. He still was refusing any discussion of it years after. Add on to this that Fred was reported to have had a very bad gambling addiction and owed a lot of money to several people, and it starts to somewhat make sense. Yet the biggest eye-opener was that many people surrounding this case strongly believe when Fred Baxter died on April 22, 1932, that Loewenstein's son Bobby was responsible for his death. Bobby was the person who discovered Fred's body, and on top of that, the gun that was used in Fred's death was registered to Robert Bobby Loewenstein. Add even more onto that, with many people close to Fred saying that he would never take his own life. And a strong theory could start to be built around the idea that Fred's death was revenge on behalf of Alfred Loewenstein. But regardless of any theory, no matter how strong, Alfred Loewenstein's death is still labeled as unsolved by many and will appear to stay in that state forever. Most all associated with this mystery are now long since dead. Any credible information is rare, and most of the story is made up of either assumptions by police, falsified records from the media, or speculation from those who have read the story. What we do know is that Alfred Loewenstein fell 4,000 feet into the English Channel and would begin a story that was so conflicted it would leave most researching it stumped. I myself am having trouble believing any theory, even the one with Madeline, Donald, and Fred being behind it. While it does sound good, to be honest, there really isn't much concrete information to prove it. Where many would wonder how the door was even opened, how nobody heard anything, why Madeline was acting so odd, it all pales in comparison into the strange fate of Alfred Loewenstein. I want to give a big thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon, with special thanks to Borgov the Straightener, KCD, Jace, A Dumb Thought, Lena, OOD Hamhord, Ryan93, Espeeve, Sir Tony, Skelly, Andis, Bethany, Blake, Boop, D. Wilson, Marilena Pendoja, Riley Brennan, Math Won't Miss You, and Cat God. Remember to stay safe out there, friends. Good night.